next speaker, last speaker for today.
Still alive.
Oh, yes, is the furthest traveled one, Jean. Jean and I met 12 years ago, I think.
2007, when I put in enterprise architecture at Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Yeah, we were like
you were at
Terraplan, yes. But we introduced EA and tools in many companies together in the US, yes, and you know all the stuff better than I do.
I'm old, but I have a good memory.
She's a conference speaker in like at the Buy-in conference, Gartner, OPEX, different others, Open Group. She's ran the FIPO, the Federation of Enterprise Architecture Professional Organization. It's more a US thing to found different nonprofit organizations.
In architecture.
Yes, in architecture. And she will talk us through standing up EA practices and doing governance.
No, that's not
just
what
the
we
governance.
were talking about.
Yeah, she knows everything better.
So, I'll make this short. I've got 30 minutes and I'm old. So, first of all, I just wanted to clarify that I did retire in 2020 and I failed. I'm an architect. We all fail, right? And went into consulting. I had a lot of people asking me, could you just come in? Da, da, da. So I started my own like independent, another mistake. So I did not get to retire. And I've been at Levi Strauss. They've been a client of mine for a year, as of yesterday. So I just continue to trudge along in this industry, and I'm very passionate about it. So what I'm trying to do is retire, though, guys. I really am. So I do some speaking, but not since 2020 when, everything got kind of shut down. So this is sort of me. Let's see, does that work? This way? Sorry. Oh, needs to be on. How cool. Anyway, so this is really not a present. Well, first of all, if you don't know me, Google me or LinkedIn. You're all smart. So secondly, this is more of a discussion than a presentation because you guys have said it all. I don't know about how you feel about today, but I am extremely impressed, and I've gone to a lot of conferences and spoken on a lot, and these were good presentations. So I think everybody gets a round of applause for all the things we saw today. But anyway, for the last probably 3 to 5 years, I've been in companies, and of course I love enterprise architecture and standing them up and doing the governance. And the two things that keep coming up are the struggle. So first of all, we're all struggling for transformation and optimization. I don't know any company that isn't, whether it's Fortune 100, 500, or even a startup. And I think the challenge that they're all facing is the fact that they can't even figure out where the strategies are going, right? Because business is moving a little bit faster than IT. And the other thing is, even if they do get a strategy going, how the heck do they govern it? Because most companies use transactional governance. We're all familiar with that. I mean, come on, we all came out of PMOs, project management. You manage by transaction or projects, right? Or portfolios. Well, transformation it's a different animal. I mean, just the scope of it is different. In transactional governance, what you're doing is you've got projects, project portfolios. A change comes, you get a technology, you apply it. Business doesn't change. They may use some new forms or, do things a little faster, but they're not going to change the way they do their business. Transformation, on the other hand, comes in and your business has changed. You're not doing business the same way. You're doing, you've got new markets, you're developing your products differently. So how do you govern good old project transaction based with product and data? that's whatever, that's the customers and companies I talk to, that's a huge challenge because they got one foot, hey, we got that figured out. And then enterprise architecture saying, hey, we need to govern transformation. This isn't working, we have optimization. So anyway, I think that's what's facing the main challenges for governance, for at least in the enterprise architecture organizations. So what I wanted to talk to today was, I'm going to talk about 3 companies that right-size their governance using different models based on the requirements of the company where they could realize value. And I think that's the future of enterprise architecture. You bring value. Business outcomes, I heard that floated up today. Well, that's it. I mean, business outcomes is where it's at. So you have to be a consultant. We all know that as an enterprise architecture, but you got to be technical enough to talk to the IT people, and you need to know how to architect a solution, right? Let alone help drive the strategy and push enterprise architecture, roll that stone up that hill. You have to get, you need to get up where the product are, where strategies are actually being made. Wendy spoke very well about business architecture and strategy, and I always say, enterprise architects are just, we're swimming upstream without a helmet, and it gets painful after a while. But you have to get up there into the strategy and then do your full cycle back, which I think a couple of people already addressed. So this is the way that I have been able to roll out governance where people could value it, either with a KPI or OKR. The 4 things that these companies all had in common, which maybe you guys do too, they were going through social and market changes, digital customers. Levi was a really good example. COVID hit, all of a sudden, guess what? Brick and mortar, everything was online. Pennies, Amazon, I mean, they had new markets they didn't even know about, and they had to support that in a seamless experience. Plus, make sure that everybody could work remotely around the world. Organizational drivers were cost control. Most of the banks, and my background is mostly financial and insurance companies, most banks in the US have enormous technical debt. 75% of their budgets go to technical debt. Doesn't leave a whole lot for projects, does it? That is a statistic that I used 2 years ago, so God only knows where it is now. But it's large. And I was a VP at Fulton Bank, which was, small regional bank, 8 banks. They had the debt. That was their debt. And when I was back at Freddie Mac, we ran 69%, and that was like 5 years. But technical debt is huge, and most people don't even know about it because if you're a CIO, which, by the way, is an acronym for career is over, you know that you don't want to be voicing, hey, my budget is going here. You can bury it in different ways. But cost drivers are huge. The other thing is IT supports multiple business silos. I don't know any company that I've ever worked in where they didn't have business silos and enterprise architecture was charged with, hey, we need a horizontal view. You can let the vertical domains do whatever the hell they want, but we need a horizontal view. And how do you do that? You've got multiple business silos. You have to apply principles and standards. How do you do that? So that's part of the transformation challenge. And then, as I said, governance has been transactional pretty much everywhere. So the 3 companies I'm going to talk about all had very young enterprise architecture organizations. 1 was brand new. 2 were restructured. And the restructuring, I don't know about you guys, but in the United States, I don't know, it's a very high ratio of enterprise architecture organizations that fail. They just don't know how to deliver value, or they get stuck, in that mindset that we were talking about earlier, which is, really polarized and it is not agile enough, right? So this company that I'm talking about here was huge. This was a brand new enterprise architecture organization. You would think, as big as they are, and they were buying a company a year, would have enterprise architecture. They had enterprise architects, what we would call solution architect. They had those out in the lines of business, but nothing pulled together, no tools, nothing. Everything was done very siloed. So one of the things we did, was we put together a directive governance model after we did use cases. Use case is a foreign word to most enterprise architects in the United States, but it has to be done. You have to have use cases in order to really define what is that problem and why are you doing it, right? I heard a lot about cloud here today, and I have to say that I was talking to a company 2 weeks ago, and they switched cloud providers. $1.5 million project. I was like, really? Why did you do that? I was like, I don't know. Somebody made a decision. We changed it. And I was like, oh, CIO, career is over. Okay. So, again, a use case. Part of architect's job is to stand up and ask why. But anyway, these guys used a directive governance model, which is, insurance, high-risk environment, highly regulated. They needed to look at a transformation strategy, and they realized, okay, if we're going to get from A to Z, we know that there's, several tiers that we've got to go down here. So this directive model was a bit transactional, but what it did was the core of its agenda of governance was very agile. It really focused on what is the organizational strategy, what is the need, what context is the requirement coming at me into IT, and they didn't have business architects, by the way. They had like senior product managers that kind of functioned as business architects. They made sure that their central controls were around how do we create the architecture, how do we maintain it, and how do we use it? Because it was very important that everybody was on the same page and that there were some, not only principles, but what we would call guidelines. And then they used reviews. Instead of saying, no, we're going to stop that project or try to get the PMO director replaced, which I highly recommended. What we did was reviews. Reviews came along if that project or product was crossed one or two, business silos, and we put some numbers around it. If it was over 5 million, it got this kind of a review. It was over 10 million. It was kind of risk-based as pertaining to the architecture. So those were kind of what we installed. They were somewhat rigid, but they also, and we put this all around a tool, of course, because, you got to have that repository. And we standardized all the artifacts, which everybody does anyway. But the idea being that we had guidelines, we got in front of the business to some degree, because that was an education process with the business. Now, the realized benefits that we identified in that use case or use cases were that we promised the CEO, the board, and the CIO, you're going to have a digitized transformation roadmap. You're going to have a shared transformation roadmap. And it took a year, which sounds like a lot, but when you're talking business silos, you got to get everybody on the same page in order to, create that horizontal view. And then the domains created their blueprints and rolled those up. So the idea was we met a huge business realization by providing a huge roadmap that said, okay, these guys are doing this, they're doing that, this is here. And while you're doing that, you're doing iteration reviews as well. And every quarter, we would review that roadmap and say, you know what? These guys are doing this. We don't need this here. Let's combine these value streams and see where we go from there. So we identified clear markets and a planning cycle. We got business and IT into the same planning cycle. And then we did external benchmarking, which I know no company likes to do. But in insurance, it really paid off because we paid a lot of money for external benchmarking and we found out what our competitors were doing. And then we put that in as our KPIs right down to process level 2. So if you were doing this and they were doing it at a level 5, well, we had to at least come in at a 7 to be competitive. And it sounds very detailed, but it isn't, because if you get the attributes in those tools right, you can slice and dice your data anyway, and I think our doc and that was here earlier, they can certainly do that in their tool. But the idea is that those were the realized benefits that came out of the use case. Now, there was a lot of detail that we had to do. You have to set up the foundation and you got to get job descriptions the same, and you have to have your standards and your governance reviews and your boards. You got to have all of that stuff together, which everybody does anyway. But we thought it was best to go for realized benefits that meant something. And that got us budget, and that got us pushed up in the what I would call the life cycle of IT. So the second company was a huge home loan mortgage company. The only one in the United States, right? But anyway, this was huge. Our EA department was 150. We were big. But what was happening was the company, all mortgage companies and insurance, they're very fragmented, right? And it was hard. I think all the EA processes, the tools we had, the way they were doing the architecture, target architectures, et cetera, they had it down, but it just wasn't resonating in the business. So, what we did was we started what I would call lighthouse projects, and it was addressed earlier here, where you kind of do these projects to say, okay, we're going to do a quick transaction or transformation or a small project to automate, put in a small ML, AI, RPA, whatever, small type projects. Thank you. The idea is get some success, get some wins behind us. And then what we did was we had, of course, siloed lines of business, and we moved to a multi-level model which spread out the governance. Yes, you had horizontal governance at an enterprise architecture level. We focused on the architecture. We focused on the strategy and how that was going to be applied. We let the domains, we pushed standards, we pushed artifacts, we pushed principles. Well, we had principles, but we pushed what I would call the technical standards and the ways of doing business. We pushed that down at the domain level, let them deal with it, because they each did something a little bit different, but at the same time, they did, they knew what the rules were. So we didn't have to worry about that. And the board, the enterprise architecture board, ended up with a CIO, lots of senior vice presidents sitting in around a table once a month, and they made do or die decisions. And it was really cool to see because they had facts, we had statistics, we would do a presentation, this is the technology we think we should do, and we had real discussions and debates and arguments about that, the good and the bad. I'd say most of them went through, but we killed a lot too. We killed a lot, but we in architecture didn't kill it. We provided the information, the presentation, and the guidance, right? We were consultants. We let those guys risk their job. So multi-level, I think what we did, the 3 areas were metrics shifted to what matters most. We focused on optimizing core products and services and new platforms. We pushed away from projects. We moved towards product. We made data-driven decisions to manage risk, cost, and again, endorse platforms because the company really needed to move in that direction. The benefits that we promised were roadmaps focused on capabilities and the role technology played, because the role technology played in the mortgage industry varied by line of business, and it's highly governed as well. The investments aligned to the optimization and transformation efforts. So we built roadmaps with the business. They're about a ½ inch thick. But you know what? It outlined all their projects that they were going to be doing that next 2 years, which we would review. It outlined their vision. It tied their vision, their strategy, et cetera, to those projects and KPIs. And the third thing that we delivered was the optimizations at scale. When you're doing those kinds of projects or moving to product and platform, you've got to optimize the guts, right? You got the core technology has to be optimized. And what we had to do was that roadmap had to build in the efforts, the optimization efforts that were going to be there. And if we couldn't make them, we knew it pretty well ahead and we could pull back. But that was huge. And a business was totally oblivious to this, but they got very much engaged. So that was a multi-level model that we used. They still use that model today. And the last one, I think I have, 5 minutes or less. Anyway, this is a model that I'm promoting going forward in architecture because it works really well. You have either an EA organization that's been restructured, tainted, bad karma, whatever. You can't use the word governance. You have to use architecture committee, or guidance. Governance had such a bad connotation. But what we did there was we identified that, we're a center of excellence. We're really high-paid consultants that are in this group. Again, we have solution architects. They're in the domains, the business domains and architecture domains, but we're this level. So pull yourself up. You're at a strategic level. So you're working with the business to say, you want to do this for, seamless customer experience, or you're moving out of China. Where are you going? We need to know. The idea being we understood that strategy. We spoke their language, and then we could come back and say, if you're going to do this, then here's your roadmap, and it's going to cost you this much, and this is the percentage of risk. So that, I think enterprise architects are moving up into more in consultative roles. Yes, they have to have that knowledge and they have to have the deep dive capability, but they need to be consultants as well and speak the language. So again, at a center of excellence, we focused on the business architecture domains. We drove down all the governance to them. We were like, take care of your own domain. If you screw up, you know it, we'll know it too. But let's keep to your standards, your patterns. We wanted consistent artifacts across the domains. The controls focused on product-first architecture. Controls being if projects were coming in on that project portfolio or they're in that planning cycle, first thing we said, is this a product or a service? If they couldn't answer that, they needed to go back to the drawing table. And what that did was, okay, you tell us what that is. So that started driving some common language, and they started realizing, oh, we need a product-first architecture. Okay, what's that going to take? So it was a bit of an education, but they're moving forward on it. The other was that we wanted to make sure that any transformation investments were compatible with the other strategies that were being driven across. The realization that we promised was value streams. Adopt value streams, stick with it, and work, some agility into that so that you can always go back and redirect. We provided cross-domain views, which really proactively identified disruptions and misalignment because of the transparency. because this domain is pushing out these solutions, and this domain over here has got the same solutions. They're buying the same technology, right? I mean, it's a huge company. So what we did was a lot of that stuff bubbled up because of the transparency. And again, a shared roadmap really identified or enabled, actually, business and IT to drive each other, right? So business was driving strategy, IT was actually driving the business. And they became, kind of in a really good planning cycle or loop, so to speak. So of the companies that we've rolled out governance, this one I think is more transferable to most companies, especially large companies. So in closing, you need both. You still got to manage projects, but you also have to manage transformation and optimization. So too little governance, we know what that happens. And too much, you're constrained. And that's where enterprise architecture has been rooted, where it's, you can't do this, you can't do that, we can't do this, we're slow to react. So, and transactional governance, quite truthfully, is so disconnected. It's really disconnected from where we need to go. Today, I was so encouraged. I heard people talking about business outcome-driven architecture, products. We're focused on products. And somebody dared to say that we're moving towards data. That was exciting. So, but the idea is that you have to have a blend, and you've got to figure out what works the best in your company, but let the requirements drive it. So get business architecture involved, make sure that you're understanding that strategy and the requirements for architecture that meet those requirements. And it could be, different shades, but you have to be able to have the KPIs, et cetera, hooked onto that so you can come back and say, you know what, here's our business outcome this year. We did this, here's the roadmap, here's where we delivered, and by the way, fire this guy because we couldn't deliver here. So that's it. You need both. Hope that helped.
Okay.
Oh, quick question. Everybody was talking about books, and Wendy just released her book, which is awesome, by the way. So a friend of mine who I was supposed to help with, I didn't, but he did publish, and he has some great, like a quantum leap on discussions about how you create architecture models that can be flexible and work. So Anthony, I highly recommend Anthony. You pick up his book too.
Thank you. Lots of reading now we have to do after all this conference. Yeah. Darn it. I thought I can go to a conference and skip the reading. That's like what I like to do.
That never happens.
So
Anyway.
Thank you so much, Jean.
I think we're out of time, right?
We're out of time. So
That's lucky.
for questions, just hit Jean up afterwards. Sorry. But I really liked kind of like the balance that you have to strike between kind of like the too much governance or too little. And it's also, I think, something that was also said earlier on like the agile from Melanie. It's something where we all say others should do something. It's like the governance is always like, yeah, I want to govern somebody else, but I don't want to be governed. Like, no. It's the same with like the agile. Yes, the others should be agile, but oh, you want to change me? Why? I'm perfect. So totally get that. So thank you so much, Jean.
Sure.